of the Senate?
You need to be,
30 years old. Why is the Senate older than the House?
because they have longer terms.
Well, they do have longer terms. The Senate is considered kind of like the big brother or the little bit slightly more powerful one. So a little bit more prestigious there. What about the residency requirements?
9 years.
9 years. Membership in the Senate.
6 terms.
Okay, 6-year terms. So the terms are 6 years. What about the membership in the Senate? 100. The House is based on population or the Virginia plan. The Senate is based on equality or the New Jersey plan. And those 6-year terms, how do they work? The House has everybody elected every 2 years, correct? How does the Senate do it?
Every 2 years, a third of.
1/3 of the Senate every 2 years. And that's kind of a key point. Remember, the House is always pushing pass bills, pass bills, pass bills. Well, if I'm a senator and I've got 6 years, I'm dragging my feet on this because I got more time, and we can still think about this a little bit more. So the House and the Senate are almost fighting each other sometimes to get bills passed because the House is always pushing and the Senate is always encouraging them to slow down. What are the things that the Senate can do that the House can't, in addition to trying impeachments? What's that? I said, what can the Senate do that the House can't, other than trying impeachments? Treaties and appointments. What's the Senate's role in treaties and appointments? Shame.
Power.
What's that?
Then, like, once the,
Yeah, zoom in on her. Yeah, zoom in.
isn't it, that the Senate has to approve such treaties and appointments? Like, the president initiates them, but they have to be approved by the Senate?
President will nominate the
Go ahead and
appointments.
zoom in on
Nominate,
all you
like, no, keep zoomed in on her. Yeah, yeah. Senate will zoom in. No, the Senate will pardon me, the president will nominate appointments. Judges, cabinet members, ambassadors, these kinds of things, subject to the approval of the Senate. The president, the executive branch, will negotiate treaties, also subject to the approval of the Senate. If the Senate does not approve, then the United States is not bound by that. And the difference is that these are only Senate powers. The revenue bills must start in the House, but the Senate will have their say. The House doesn't have a say on treaties and appointments. No say on treaties and appointments. What other things do you see down here in terms of the terms?
Hotline.
Removed hotline.
Gerrymandering?
What was gerrymandering?
Switching the
Oh.
areas, voting
It's creating
districts?
majority districts, either Democratic or Republican.
This actually goes hand in hand with reapportionment. And if you remember, every 10 years there's a Senate, and they'll reapportion the districts so that the states that gain population, they might get additional seats. The states that lose population, they're obviously going to lose seats in Congress. But the trick with gerrymandering is that when you're in charge of drawing these districts, if you've got to equalize the districts so that they're roughly about the same size, about 800,000, what's the second factor that oftentimes political parties start thinking about?
The same political view.
They want to create as many majority districts of their party as is possible. And gerrymandering is technically cheating, and it's illegal. Do you remember the picture that I drew?
Salamander.
Gerrymander came from Elbridge Gerry. He drew a district that looked like a salamander. And in fact, when he drew this district that looked like a salamander, they caught him and they struck it down. And here's the key with this. The key with gerrymandering or salamandering, whatever you want to consider on this, is this. You can draw majority districts in any number of places, but it can't look like you're trying to draw a majority district in any number of places. And if you look up here, this is actually from page 270. This is that salamander-looking district that he had drawn that circled like a serpent around all of the others. If you notice, these others look basically about the same size, except for this one that goes across here. If one district looks way different than all the others, that's going to look suspicious, and they're going to strike that down. If 9 districts are Democrat and 4 are Republican, but they all look the same, and they're all the same size, they're typically going to let that go. Racial gerrymandering, do you remember what that was?
North.
Trying to
It
get
was
like
like
more black.
getting in Alabama.
Trying to exclude like black voters.
There were 2. In Alabama, they were trying to exclude black voters by drawing that 26-sided voting district, and that was struck down. And if you remember, the court said any time that race is the primary factor when drawing a district, it is immediately constitutionally suspect. Do you remember what my old home state of North Carolina did?
It says created districts for whites and blacks, so that, right?
They wanted to include more minority voters.
Yeah.
They were concerned about minorities not being elected to Congress, specifically black representation, so they created majority-minority districts, meaning there was going to be a majority of black residents that lived there. And if there was a majority of black residents, then Laura, what is it exactly that they would elect?
They would probably elect their own minority.
They would elect a black candidate. And if you remember, they drew a district that was called the I-85 district. I think several of the classes thought it looked like a tongue or a banana or something, I don't know. But the idea was that if you drove down the road with both of your car doors open, you would basically hit and kill everybody that lived in the district. And they struck that down. So both instances, whether you're trying to exclude or include, race is the primary factor, and that's not going to be legal. If it looked the same as the other districts, and it happened that it was a racially majority district, a minority majority district, then in fact that's fine. But if it looks different, that's going to be something that's going to draw some suspicion. As you look at this, I think we've covered basically all of these, pretty much. Looking at articles here, now I'll be fairly brief with this. The spanking article, there's some detail that you can go into with the spanking article. If you remember, California wanted to ban spanking. How old for the children they could not be spanked? Basically, under 4 years old. So up until 4 years old, you would not be allowed to spank. And if you remember, what was the penalty? It could be actually up to a year in jail, and in fact, it would be a misdemeanor charge, in fact, as well. So take a look at that article, and I believe it even mentions in there the difficulties with enforcement. It mentioned in there the woman that introduced the bill didn't have any kids, you know, this kind of a thing. There's some stories that you could tell, and I believe we had discussed some of the ways that some of y'all had been spanked, and what would be allowed and what wouldn't. I'm not going to get into that on film. The X Factor. Do you remember the X Factor article with Jerry Ryan?
Yes.
Oh yeah.
The divorce. The divorce?
Yeah, the divorce. Who was the person that was running for office?
Her husband, a congressman.
Jack Ryan was running for Illinois Senate, and what was it that came out that the Democrats found in the divorce
He
records?
liked taking his wife Jerry to sex clubs.
He wanted to take her to sex
But
clubs,
she didn't want to go.
wanted to have sex in public, and she didn't want to go. And what did he tell her when he was
told her that
disappointed?
her tears are a turnoff.
Her tears were a turnoff. What happened in Illinois when this story broke?
Oh my goodness, I think that he had to withdraw. But
He
she
did.
said that he was a good dad anyway.
She said he was a loving father and a good man. Notice she didn't mention husband in there. Yeah. But nonetheless, he still had to resign. And if you remember with this, I had given this within the context of incumbency. You usually have to do something stupid in order to lose. And he was not an incumbent, but he was running in an open seat. I had given you Foley, the guy that sent the inappropriate text to the pages, Senator Craig from Montana, who tapped his foot, I probably shouldn't do that on camera, tapped his foot underneath the stall in the men's room, and he got busted by law enforcement. I had given you Anthony Weiner, who took pictures of his wiener, if you remember. What's that?
Carlos Danger.
Carlos Danger, yeah. When you think about this, you've got to do something stupid. And I think you yelled it out just before, Angela. Who won the Illinois Senate seat after the Democrats went through these sealed divorce records? Obama did, and this is a story that you don't always hear. The out-of-wedlock laws, this was the North Carolina law that prevented males and females from cohabitating or living together out of wedlock. Remember Deborah Hobbs? She was the dispatcher who was fired and then ultimately sued and won. Take a good look at that out-of-wedlock law. And then we've talked about protecting our kids a little bit, the sex offender law. And if you remember, with these laws, what were they doing? They were actually prohibiting convicted sex offenders from living within X number of feet of nurseries, of schools, of places where children gather. And if you go into the links on this, and please take a good look at this, We've got, there's the Chinese restaurant that we had talked about before. There was the Georgia sex offender law. There's no doubt about this one. There was the naked man drinking coffee in Virginia that we spent time on that everybody was upset about. If you'll notice in here, we dealt with Iverson, and then there's also Chris Paul dealing with the NBA dress codes. Not everybody dealt with the Obama clown. Did all of you address Melissa Nelson? Melissa Nelson was the woman that was fired because she was too pretty?
Yeah.
Yeah, so all of you dealt with that one. Okay, all right. I'll make sure that that's on there, but there's a video for that one. Take a good look at that. And then scrolling down here, Tiger Fuzzy and the collard greens. If you remember that one, we were talking about whether or not fried chicken was offensive. A lot of you thought it was when Fuzzy said it, even though when we put it in that Delaware Department of Transportation, it didn't seem quite as much. I'm running really low on time, and I don't want to go too fast, but okay, good. I want to address the executive chapter really quick, and let me make sure that I eliminate the right terms on this. So in the executive chapter, as you take a look at this, okay, let's remove executive privilege at this point. 11 o'clock, if y'all will remove pardon, but everybody else got to pardon. And then if y'all will remove U.S. versus Nixon and U.S. versus Fitzgerald.
You mean Nixon versus?
I'm sorry, Nixon versus Fitzgerald, yes. And everybody remove executive privilege, because we have not dealt with that. A lot of these we just dealt with this week. And at the end of last week, but the 22nd Amendment, if you remember, dealt with term limits. The 25th Amendment was a big one. Do you remember the 4 parts of the 25th Amendment? Because I had showed you the Harrison Ford video earlier this week dealing with the 25th. The first part said that if something happens to the president, the vice president takes over. The second part said if there is a vacancy in the office of the vice president, the president will nominate a vice president subject to majority vote of the House and the Senate. Those were pretty clear. Go ahead, John.
I was gonna say, we didn't really go over pardon.
No, I know, you just said that.
11 o'clock class. Yeah, 11 o'clock class is out for pardon, but everybody else is good. Third section of the 25th Amendment.
What was the second one again?
Second one is there's a vacancy in the office of the vice president. The president can nominate somebody subject to a majority vote approval, just a majority vote by the House and the Senate.
There's a third one where the vice president and all the members or majority members of the cabinet can make a
That's the
letter.
fourth one. What's the third one?
Gives the power to the vice president.
If the president feels that he is unable to discharge his duties, then in fact the vice president can sign over the office of the president with written documentation, leadership of the House to the leadership of the Senate. And then when the president is ready to take it back over, the president can. I have given you the example of George W. when he had surgery for some polyps. I think President Reagan, when he had an assassination attempt and he was shot, same kind of thing. You give up the power, maybe it's medical, some people would argue maybe alcoholism, these kinds of things, but then you can get it back. The fourth section of the 25th Amendment, if you remember, was yours. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, that was like the vice president, along with a majority of the leaders of the cabinets, can basically remove the president from power. They have to like write up something that says the president is unfit to rule.
Yes.
And if the vice president signs it along with at least, not everybody, just a majority of the cabinet members, they can remove him from
Who
power.
absolutely has to sign it, though?
Vice president.
Vice President, absolutely. And if you remember the Harrison Ford video, every single member of the cabinet said, yes, the president is unfit, but the vice president did not sign, so it didn't go forward because the vice president would have to take the role of being the president. And the president cannot get it back on request, basically, but it's got to be given by the vice president and a majority of the cabinet afterwards. And you could talk about this in terms of if somebody has some form of a disability, if somebody has some form of substance abuse, if somebody has their child taken, if you remember, like in Air Force One, he was making a decision as a husband and a father, not as a president. With these articles, what was the number one attribute that the American people wanted according to that Gallup poll in a president?
Courage.
Was not oral skills. Yeah, I remember that class. It was not Hispanic, according to the 10 o'clock class, but rather it was courage. That's right. Courage was number 1. And do you remember the top 5 presidents, according to that article?
Lincoln.
Lincoln was 1.
Nixon
Reagan was 2.
JFK.
JFK was 3. Clinton was 4. And who was 5? FDR was 5. No Washington, no Jefferson, no Teddy Roosevelt, none of these people. The birthers. What's that?
Reagan was 2?
Reagan was 2, according to this Gallup